Did you ever have mom or dad or a teacher or somebody in authority sit you down and give you a really long talk about what it is you were getting wrong, and partway through the talk, maybe as a kid or maybe even as someone older than a kid, you were like, okay, all right, I get it. Okay, thank you. Yep, I know. All right, okay, yep, okay, yep, you're right. I shouldn't have, yep, okay, thanks, bye. Okay, but the longer they keep going and the more you're like, okay, I think I get it, the more you realize, no, now they're on to another completely separate thing. And yeah, I guess I did screw that up too. And oh, no, okay, I thought I got that and that was probably it. But no, now that you keep talking, Dad, yep, I guess I screwed that thing up too. And you realize that sometimes these omnibus lectures that you get from a parent that cover multiple different points of failure, they feel really, really bad. But when it's all over, you're like, yeah, I'm kind of glad that we just got all of that over with right now. But when you're a parent and you give one of those more extensive lectures, you realize something you didn't get as a kid. And that is this. When I give one of those multifaceted talking tos to my kids, it's because all of the points relate. And they want to think about it in just single little isolated things. Like, I shouldn't have said that to my sister. Or, yeah, I should have done the thing you said. But what I'm trying to point out is like there's a pattern here. There's a whole batch of things that I want us to be working on because all of these things are demonstrative of the same underlying thing that is the character project that we need to be chipping away at right now, kiddo. And so I'm sure likewise in Matthew chapter 23, the Pharisees are like, okay, yeah, I know you don't like, okay, yep, too long with the tassels. Okay, I think I get it. Okay, thanks, bye, thanks. But each new thing that Jesus tags on is further demonstrative of what has broken, and as we talked about yesterday, what this fractured, failed system that they have gradually produced that doesn't make fruit is all about. So let's just review here what the points of this omnibus talking to are that Jesus has directed toward the Pharisees in the presence of all of these people on Passover week in the vicinity of the temple. And so, all right, what do we got here? Thing number one, don't do what the Pharisees do, for they don't practice what they preach. Okay, so accusation number one is hypocrisy, but maybe it's better to just view accusation number one as being more like the thesis statement for the rest of this omnibus talking to that Jesus is directing at them, and the rest of the things that Jesus is going to say here could maybe be considered supporting evidences or supporting points to demonstrate that indeed they don't practice what they preach. I'm not sure that's the best read on the outline, but it's one way to think of it. Either way, point number one, they don't practice what they preach, hypocrisy. Point number two, they burden people down. Well, that's not their job. Their job is to connect people with God, and they're doing the exact opposite. And once people are burdened down, they seem to like the suffering of the people in their care, and so they don't do anything to, number three, alleviate that burden. So hypocrisy, burden people down, legalism, rules, religious stuff that's not Bible, not God, and they don't do anything to help. Problem number four comes up here in verse 5. Everything they do is done for men to see, so now we get into their motives. They're doing this because they want credit from other people. They do stuff with their religious garments that are meant to draw attention to themselves. And all of the stuff that we get here in verses 5, 6, and 7 should be viewed as supporting the point that he's making. The whole thing is a fraud. It's for men to see. So whether you're talking about the outfits or the phylacteries, or whether you're talking about the greetings in public, or whether you're talking about people calling them rabbi, which we'll get into more here in just a minute, it's all further evidence of their hypocrisy, of their self-love, of their pride, of their lack of concern for others. So this multifaceted talking to, it's getting pretty heavy here. And I'm sure at all of these points, they're like, all right, we get it. But no, not really, because Jesus is saying like all the things you do point to the exact same flaws, flow from the exact same flaws. So I'm sure for them, that's all very uncomfortable, but the discomfort continues. Verse 8, Matthew 23, but you're not to be called rabbi, for you have only one master, and you're all brothers. And don't call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he's in heaven. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant, for whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. So much there. Revisiting the term rabbi, as promised a second ago, the notion of a rabbi is being somebody who goes around like, what am I thinking? Fiddler on the Roof. The Fiddler on the Roof notion of rabbi. That's a little bit later development. We're still a few decades before the idea of a rabbi being a really impressive teacher who people would go to for wisdom and interpretation. We're getting there at this point in history, late in the life of Christ. But after 70 AD, with the temple going away, now Judaism kind of goes franchisey. It goes out, and the individual local leaders become more important because you don't have that headquartered leadership and that leadership thought body like the Sanhedrin functioning in the same way that it did before the destruction of the temple at the hands of the Romans in 70 AD. So what we think of as rabbi is probably a little bit anachronistic compared to what it would have meant here. From what I can gather, it looks like the term rabbi at the time of Christ was a title of respect that meant graced or great one, and wouldn't necessarily have been just directed at the kind of person who's a teacher or a scholar in the way we might think of it now. So if that's the case, Jesus is pushing back on these guys wanting these honorific titles and really reveling in that and thinking that they're maybe entitled to a title that is more meant for fancy people in society, but somehow trying to elevate their religious leadership thing to like, oh, no, we're fancy people in society too. We're the upper crust also, could be read that way. But he goes on to say, you have only one master and you are all brothers. Now that's very interesting as well. And this brothers and fathers, familial language in the midst of a bit of a rebuke is all kind of reminiscent of what happened at the end of Matthew chapter 12, where Jesus' mother and family members are outside, and it looks like Mary doesn't even come in to where Jesus is teaching and instead sends somebody in to be like, hey, go get him. It looks like they've come to collect Jesus, who they think is misguided or missing the point or needs some kind of help or redirection from them. And I know that for some people theologically, it's pretty offensive to suggest that Mary was not fully in step with Jesus and what he was doing at all points. I'm not trying to make a theological statement directed at groups that very, very highly and uniquely revere Mary. I'm just trying to go with what the text says and how Jesus responds to her and Jesus' brothers coming to collect him. And you recall in 1247, it says, somebody told Jesus, hey, your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you. And then Jesus replied to him, who's my mother? Who are my brothers? Pointing to his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. So Jesus is building this new family of faith. He's been talking about it a lot, hinting at it a lot, hinting at the idea that the old family of faith, that one that is born out of Abraham, is not salvific. It's not automatic, that there's something newer and bigger, that Abraham thing, that even individual family was supposed to point to this bigger, truer, realer family of faith. And so here, rabbi seems to be something that he's likening to like an honorific title between brothers. Like before, the term master evolved into Mr., and so people would call each other master and master, like Master Kenobi and Master Skywalker. And it looks like Jesus is pushing back on this uppity, mutually affirming use of honorific titles amongst the religious leadership. And he's using that to get into this idea of family. And then he goes on to say, and don't call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father and he's in heaven. Now here again, it's like the second time in 2 minutes. I know that it is very possible that this text or the way we're looking at the text could step on some toes, and that's really not my intention. But obviously, a huge percentage, like half of Christianity uses the term father to refer to a religious leader at a local church or in a certain religious hierarchy. And then a whole bunch of other Christians, citing passages like this, would be like, I don't think that's the right title that we should probably use there. I don't really have time or interest in getting into the entire debate other than to say it looks like what is happening here is that Jesus is saying, you guys are trying to claim titles that are not appropriately yours. You're misunderstanding the notions of this new family of faith. And the best, and it looks like at least from this text, and exclusive application of the term Father in a spiritual title sense, as if it's directed at the one true Father, capital F, the Father, and there's only one, and he is in heaven. There's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one capital T teacher, the Christ. So in just a couple of sentences, Jesus has taken a shot at the title rabbi, kind of likening it to master, and saying, well, don't do that because you're all brothers, indicating that this collegiality should go far beyond the religious ruling upper crust and that anyone who's a part of this family of faith should probably be called brother. But then the father title seems to come with a prohibition, at least that's how it looks like in this text, because while you have many brothers and they're all worthy of that title by merit of being included in the new family of faith, the family of faith only has one Father, capital F, and so that title should be reserved for him. Again, total respect for people who are part of a different tradition and might read that differently. I'm just trying to relay what it looks like is being said in the text immediately. And then thirdly, he takes a pop at the word teacher. I don't think anybody treats this as a universal prohibition on the notion of teacher, but the ultimate title of teacher, capital T, he very boldly here is saying should be ascribed to the Christ. And then he wraps all of that up, hearkening back to language that he used when James and John's mom came along and was like, hey, can my kids sit at your right hand? Can they have your watch when you are dead? And Jesus responded to that with that repeated motif that we've seen throughout Matthew about the first being last, the last being first, and all of that being in keeping with the example of Christ. He said, Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So what we're seeing here is a contrast between the Pharisees and kingdom values. What we're seeing here is even the use of honorific titles and how the methods of employment for those honorific titles in Pharisaic circles were not producing fruit and were not in keeping with kingdom values, but the way they were using them, stuff means stuff, everybody knew what it meant, was instead exclusive and self-exalting and the opposite of kingdom values. If you are vicariously feeling that long talking to exhaustion that you got when your parents needed to straighten you out on something, know that we are about 33% done. We've got more to hear from Jesus, and this is 22 chapters of stuff that is built up that needs to be addressed, and we are going to wade through all of it, amigos. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. I appreciate you. Let's do it again soon.